Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Chatmeter, analyzing the COVID-19 impact on brand reputation across all industries. My name is Lizzie, and I am Senior Account Manager for Locology, and I will be your host for today's event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. If your question is not answered today, someone will be able to follow up with you. Our speaker today is Collin Holmes, CEO and founder at Chatmeter. Collin Holmes, founder and CEO, started Chatmeter in August 2009. Prior to Chatmeter, Holmes was VP of Product Management and Marketing at B-Enable, now XAB. His extensive experience in the local search industry, both online and mobile, provides a solid foundation for the direction of the company. He has worked in leadership roles at several other startup companies and held other notable positions in product and marketing roles at Economy Technologies and AT&T Wireless. He earned his MBA from San Diego State and a BA from UC Riverside. Without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it over to Collin to get things started.
Great, thank you. Excited to be with you guys today and excited to share some new information as the world is reopening. So and certainly that's exciting for everyone. So and would love just to dive right in here in terms of the agenda. We're going to talk specifically about how COVID has impacted local businesses. I'm sure many of you in the industry are seeing this firsthand and acting and reacting. And we're going to dive into the stay-at-home orders and how that affected different industries. So we're seeing different things affect some of the different industries from our customer perspective. So we're going to do a deeper dive there. Then we're going to start looking at, again, reopening and adapting to this world with COVID-19 and how local businesses can understand the customer experience as they reopen and adapt to this new world. And finally, we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. Okay, so I thought it'd be good just to do a quick timeline on COVID. And the last few months have been certainly a bit of a blur in many cases. So it's always good to take a quick look back at what really has occurred over the since March. And it was actually on March 12th that the coronavirus was officially declared a pandemic. California was the first state to issue stay-at-home orders, so really shutting down all businesses, nearly all businesses, the majority of businesses anyways, in terms of retail, restaurants, and others, really enforcing this stay-at-home order. On March 20th, just the next day after that, Google decided to disable all reviews, Google Q&A, limit listing management and prioritize listing management around the healthcare space to make sure that those critical business updates are getting made. Yelp actually started filtering COVID-19 reviews, so anything with those mentions were actually getting filtered and put into the I think unrecommended review section that they manage. So big impact certainly on reputation and in our space, and certainly for our customers and their ability to communicate with their consumers. We just saw an influx of just really negative reviews that are happening that may not even been related to any customer experiences, which is what was kind of driving this. So that lasted for a while. We'll talk about that in a minute. But March 30th. That's really we started to see the majority of stay-at-home orders that are issued across the country. So the shutting down really of the majority of the country. And then April 10th, we saw Google turning reviews back on. There were little delays for a while, and we're still seeing this in some industries, but kind of providing better engagement for businesses and consumers. And then finally, here, Georgia was the first to reopen in April. And now, of course, over the last couple of months, we're starting to see businesses reopen across the country. So before we dive into the actual data, just a little overview of how we gathered this information. We looked at a sample of customer locations in our platform over the last year and a half. You can see from January 2019 to June 2020. We've managed, and this is across millions of locations, billions of pieces of content from reviews, social media mentions, and sentiment that we've been monitoring and reporting on since 2009 when I founded the company. In terms of the locations, it includes multiple industries, as you can see here. Hospitality, local services, automotive, entertainment, really a wide gamut. And then from a industry basis, we decided we would look specifically at these areas. So retail, food services, local services, and healthcare. So that's just a quick breakdown and shows you, not everything we're looking at is retail and restaurants. We tried to look at it, across the multiple types of industries to provide some real relevant data. So if we look at this across all of the industries, what we started to see when the pandemic hit, and just to give you a background on this data, as you can see in the middle here, these are Google My Business Insights. So if you're familiar with that, through our partnership with Google and our customers, we're able to get access to an understanding of their driving directions requests, which is in blue, the phone calls that are occurring off of their Google Maps listings, and then any clicks to their website that are coming from their Google Maps listings. So really insightful data here. Obviously, as you can imagine, when the stay-at-home orders hit, the driving directions requests went way, way down. And again, this is not just retail and restaurants. We work across other industries that continue to be open, like things like multifamily and apartment space. So you're still seeing some level of activity. That's why it hasn't gone down to zero, but just a huge drop down. You can see in April down about 45%. And what we saw was phone calls, website clicks increased significantly. And we'll take a look at this on an industry basis. But again, people trying to understand, are your businesses open? What trends, are we able to, in the retail space, buy online and pick up in store, those types of things. And you'll see that in the data as we dive into some of these specific industries. As the reopening starts, you can see a little bit of returning to, not quite returning to normal from a driving directions request, but you can see about the same volume from phone calls and website. We anticipate those will probably go back down as people are more familiar with the businesses that are open over time and have less of a need to call the business directly. But you can see today they're still trying to get access to that information, understand which places are open, which ones are not, if there's any policies, regulations that you need. And certainly the website piece may be a lot of that kind of buy online and pick up in store scenario. So if we look at this from a review volume perspective, huge drop when the pandemic hit. So overall review volume is down across all industries by 72%. We started to see that climb back up a little bit in May. I mean, certainly most of the reopening has happened in late May and early June. So we'll start to see that continue to grow over time. If you look at, this is important to think about from a reputation perspective. The average star rating that we saw actually dropped significantly from about 4.2 to 4.1, so 27% drop. And we did start to see some of the people complaining about, not being able to go to this location. And again, that's one of the reasons why we saw Google turn off reviews in many cases. So that was impacting people's reputation. And this is, by the way, it's not just, again, these are all of our sources of data. This is not just Google here. This includes any data we pull from Yelp, Facebook, Foursquare, and other review sites, even industry review sites as well. that may be tailored specifically to the automotive industry, the apartment industry, the retail or food services industry. So we're starting to see this climb back up, but certainly not back to the same pre-COVID levels. In terms of response rate, you can see the average response rate was right around 50%, meaning about 50% of the reviews out there were being responded to. You saw a mild dip in April. Part of that is going to be shift from people working in the office, right? If these are typically a lot of cases, people are responding from the corporate office, they have admins working on these things, sometimes regional managers, but obviously with a big shift in a work from home environment, that's going to affect your ability to respond and take some time to be able to kind of rebound from that. And you're starting to see that here in May, getting back to closer to 50%. But probably the other thing to point out here is that overall responding is still only about 50%. So still about half of the reviews out there are not being responded to. And the impact on that from a business perspective, people do expect you to respond. The expectation from consumers now, they post this content trying to engage with the business in many cases and expect you to respond within 24 hours in a lot of cases. So there's an expectation out there, and if you don't respond, that can also lead to churn. There's plenty of stats that are saying if you're not responding and engaging with your customers, they'll go somewhere else. And so there's a retention issue here that continues to be a problem for many businesses. And that's why in many cases they turn to a tool like Chatmeter to be able to help them respond and engage with their customers. So if you take a look at mentions of COVID, we pulled all the data and tried to get an understanding of when people were actually starting to mention either coronavirus or COVID. We have a number of keywords we were looking at. And you can see there that started to obviously happen as the pandemic hit. And what's happened over time is as the reopening has started, you can see not only has the volume increased, which is natural because review volume is up, but more importantly, the ratings are up from what prior to during the the hit of the stay-at-home orders and the pandemic itself. And we're starting to see more positive reviews, people talking about actually businesses that are doing a good job during the COVID recovery and during the reopening, whether it's cleanliness, attention to detail, employees wearing masks, really making sure they're taking care of the customer experience. So we're seeing a more positive impact as businesses start to reopen. Okay, so let's do our first industry dive and take a look at the retail space. So as we mentioned and as we saw in the overall volume, certainly review volume plummeted during the pandemic as everything closed in the retail space. So this is obviously higher than what we saw as the overall average, about 90% decrease. You can see somewhat rebound, and we'll continue to see a bigger rebound in June, not only as more businesses are reopening, but consumers are getting back out there. And you'll see that really getting back out there in this next slide. Again, specifically, if we look at driving directions, which went down about 36%, but you can see post-pandemic, as the reopening starts, I shouldn't call it post-pandemic because we are still in it, so I apologize for that. But really around the reopening of the retail locations, you actually saw this return to normal levels, which is pretty exciting for that space. You can see obviously phone calls and website clicks are still way up from pre-pandemic levels from back in February, and that's logical, right? People are still trying to understand, because a lot of cases, we've seen retail locations are not, updating their listings as quickly as they need to. For example, I finally just got my haircut after 3 to 4 months of looking pretty shaggy, and went to the some barber salon and it still had the location was temporarily closed on their Google Maps listing. So I had to call, make sure that they were open. I'd heard from my stylist that it was open, and so I was pretty surprised to see it was still looking closed on their Google Maps listing. So really a lot of education going on, people, understanding or getting access to that information, being able to update. And I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges we saw in the healthcare space when we talk about healthcare. But at least a good sign that things are starting to at least return to normal from a retail perspective. And I think, if you watch the market, you probably heard we had a better than expected retail numbers, certainly still way down from pre-COVID levels, but good to see the climb back in the retail space. Let's talk a little bit about food services. This includes not only dine-in restaurants, but quick service restaurants, fast food as well. So this is really kind of runs the gamut. Similar drop in volume, and again, that makes sense from a review volume perspective and shutting of the closing of the economy and stay-at-home orders. And again, similar drops in driving directions. Now you start to see a little bit of a rebound, but certainly not to the same levels that we saw in the retail space. From a call and website conversion piece, that's still way up in the website. That would obviously be any sort of online ordering that restaurants are providing their own delivery services, or through a Grubhub or other third-party services, Uber Eats, etc. And then phone calls continue to be up to, again, understand if you're open, what your hours are, because there's consumers are just not comfortable trusting the data that they're finding online, because in many cases it's still outdated in the example I gave you before. Now, what's also interesting to think about here in the review rating side, you saw kind of a plummet in April. So this is the most drastic we saw across these star ratings. Now, a big part of this, what we saw when we looked in the data, is around some of those delivery services. So as people shifted from the restaurant to delivery services, if in many cases when people have a poor experience, unfortunately, they often will go to the business and complain about it. Certainly in some cases that may be the issue of the delivery service or the driver, but people are holding those businesses accountable. And we see this because we pull this data as well from those providers and be able to give a better understanding of what's going on from a delivery service perspective. And so that's why you start to see a big drop here in terms of the overall average rating. We're starting to see that return. You can see back up 28%, but certainly not to the pre-COVID levels, but maintaining really on average over a 4-star rating. Okay, if we take a look at local services, the next industry, this is primarily things like gyms, spas, car washes, a little bit of storage in here as well, but really those services that you're providing to consumers that in many cases are really just starting to reopen, and in some cases like spas, not even, still haven't reopened in many states. So again, review volume down, up just slightly. If we take a look at GMB actions here, you see obviously a massive plummet all across the board. And of course, again, these are, if you think about gyms, they were completely shut down in many states until mid-May, and that's where you start to see recovery here from that perspective. So still not even close to any normalcy here in this space, as many are just starting to resurface. And I think there's a little bit of a consumer concern in many cases of returning to the gym, returning to your spa, and some of those services we've seen, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the healthcare in the next section as well, which is my next slide. So just a quick overview on obviously the cases and giving a sense of what's going on in the healthcare space. This is obviously important as healthcare facilities are starting to reopen. And to give more detail, this can be hospital systems. We work with um, nursing care facilities, which have obviously been hit hard. Dental care. I mean, everything across the board is included in our data. So we thought it was important to take a look at, obviously, as the cases have started to kind of level off a little bit. Keeping that in mind as we look at the data, we move in from May into June. So we look at our data, similar review volume is down. Now you can see no recovery, really, no bounce back on a review volume perspective. And we've even heard from some of our customers that they're not getting any reviews. So we don't know if Google is still limiting this from a Google perspective, but we haven't seen really kind of any sort of bounce back on this. We have, and that could be just because of the any sort of legal issues that they're concerned about as well. So here from a DMB actions perspective, driving directions requests are down, website clicks are down, phone calls are down, somewhat returning to pre-COVID levels, as you can see. But certainly this is a big challenge for the healthcare space. Recently saw a survey, consumer survey about, all the fears of people returning to getting either dental services done, elective surgeries, really staying away from healthcare facilities. And, early on from our customers, we were hearing people were just, one, unclear as to what's open and what's not open. And then two, feeling like all the hospital systems were completely overwhelmed, so they didn't want to even burden businesses. But this is going to be certainly a big challenge of a return to normalcy, as we're starting to see consumers still have a lot of fear of going back and getting those services. Read a number of reports around this in some consumer research studies, which is going to be an ongoing challenge for this space from a financial perspective. So fairly likely you're going to need, or we're going to see some government intervention here to help our healthcare facilities financially. So from a review rating perspective, here you can see the average rating, again, took a huge drop. Again, expected as people are concerned about the coronavirus, concerned about healthcare facilities. We're starting to see a little bit of a rebound, but certainly not anywhere near the 4.3 average rating. If you look at it from an industry perspective, healthcare providers typically get a more positive spin or rating compared to some of the other industries, but we haven't seen a return to normal at this point. So hopefully I was helpful from an industry perspective, giving some insight on what's going on, any sort of return to normal, as I was mentioning. So the next section, we want to talk a little bit about kind of how you protect your reputation moving forward. So of course, the new normal is very different than what it used to look like. And some people are doing better than others. I've been to a number of restaurants over the last few weeks, and there's some people that have adapted very well and others not so much. And so I think it's important as a business owner, and even as a marketer, a digital marketer for either a regional chain or national chain, to really understand what's going on at that local level. It can be quite difficult, again, unless you have a tool in place to keep on top of that stuff. There's a lot of information out there, and the most important thing is to keep customers informed. Keeping your listings up to date, leveraging social media, really making pages on your website your source of truth, and being able to keep all of this information updated on a regular basis as things are changing dynamically. And making sure you're answering your Google My Business questions. So we've seen a number of, or an increase there as consumers are trying to get more information about, your policies and procedures during this reopening, and it's important to make sure you're answering those questions This can be a lot of information, it can be overwhelming as well. So that's why, we find it's important to have kind of a review management platform, reputation management platform, whatever you want to call it. We offer that as well as many, several other providers out there, because this can be overwhelming. And just to give an example of the volume out there, so these are a sense of kind of pre-COVID and post-COVID levels, COVID being in orange here. We're seeing 3 times the number of monthly location updates, meaning updating your hours of operation, tagging to say whether you were temporarily closed in the reopening. And to give you a sense of the volume, on March 23rd and April 3rd, we processed over 50,000 locations in location updates in a single day. So really, that's instrumental in demonstrating, how many changes are happening and how a provider like Chatmeter can really help you along the way. In the example I was going to bring up in the healthcare space, which I just remembered, we actually saw in some cases, we were hearing as we talked to prospects, not our customers, but as we were talking to prospects that were reaching out to us, because they didn't have a lot of sophistication, and when they were updating their Google My Business listings, instead of marking a facility, for example, elective surgery facility is temporarily closed, they actually removed it and deleted it entirely from Google Maps. Obviously, clearly a problem, especially if you're a customer of that facility. Now you can't access the phone number. You don't know what happened to the facility at all. Pretty scary situation. And so in many cases, we were helping our customers get through those challenges. And in fact, that's something we did during the healthcare, really during the key healthcare crisis over this pandemic. Chatmeter actually donated about $5 million in listing management services free of charge to the healthcare space to really help healthcare facilities and consumers be able to access accurate information on the web. So we're working with a ton of clients now and excited to be able to provide that information and daily updates to consumers as things are changing so rapidly. And that's an example here of what you see on this slide and volume of location updates that are happening. The other thing that we've done here at Chatmeter is enabling customers at the individual location level to update their hours of operation. So this is from our mobile app that we actually just recently released a couple weeks ago. So very excited to put this out there. It allows you to monitor and respond to reviews, of course, because that's what you expect from Chatmeter. But we actually are the only platform that has a mobile app to allow you to update your things like your hours of operation, your descriptions, etc., right from the mobile device. And we thought this is important, again, to be able to arm people at the local level. If you're a digital marketer at a national chain or even a regional chain, it's really difficult to understand what's happening at that local level. For example, is a franchise, right? And the franchisee may be in control of deciding their hours of operation. So a way to enable them to be able to do this on their mobile phone, on the fly, as they're making changes or decisions in real time, without having to log into a dashboard. In many cases, store managers and locations, retail, restaurants, they're running around their location and not always accessing dashboards. So I thought this was a vital piece, and we've got tremendous feedback from our customers who are very excited about this ability to update their listings right from their phone. Okay, as I mentioned, I forgot I did have a slide on this. I apologize. I already talked about this. This is essentially our healthcare crisis program that we gave and donated, again, up to $5 million in services to this space. We've now been updating, tens of thousands of locations for clients, providing listing management services and our platform itself to be able to monitor and respond to reviews. So really excited about the program and was happy to be able to kind of do the right thing for this industry in this space and really help consumers get access to accurate information across the web. So as I mentioned before, if you look at this, people are nervous about reopening. They're nervous about going to locations. It's going to take some time. We haven't seen this return to pre-COVID levels. Certainly we'll see probably a little more increase in June, but I wouldn't expect that, especially in some of those key industries that we talked about. It's important to make sure that you continue to call and get more information. I think we'll continue to see that throughout the summertime. Now, in terms of reputation management, it's very important to monitor, analyze, and respond to these reviews. And again, this can be a big challenge if you've got, 10 locations, not only 10 locations, but hundreds of locations. You probably have, hundreds or thousands of reviews coming in. So again, this really requires you to utilize a reputation management tool that not only is going to allow you to respond, but really understand what's happening at that individual location level in order to improve the customer experience over time. And that's really where things like sentiment analysis comes in. If you're not familiar with this, it's the ability to really understand what positive and negative things people are saying across reviews. Certainly you can go in and read the reviews. Here's some examples within the fitness space that we've seen. So the gym is full and nobody has masks. Excellent gym, but these shortened hours are bogus. So really, these are great pieces of feedback for the individual business owner or the digital marketer at the national chain, but it's impossible to read all the reviews when you have thousands. So what you can do is, when you're utilizing a tool like Chatmeter, it allows you to quickly understand positive and negative elements about these keyword topics. So in the case of gym, for example, some of the positive things they're saying, it's a clean gym, the equipment is good. Those are all positive and green, but things they're concerned about are some of the people at the gym. If you look in the yellow, for example, there's some people that are complaining about dirtiness of the gym in red, but of course that compared to the green at the top right, most people are saying it is a clean gym. So as you, again, and you can create these on a location by location basis to get a better sense of what's working and what's not working at an individual location level. So it's important to make sure that your sentiment analysis tool not only identifies those keyword topics, but again, what are the features around those topics that they're talking about, positive, negative. Okay, and then the final thing here is expanding the omnichannel experience. And what does that mean? Well, really engaging with customers to implement contactless technology, redefining the in-store experience, so really thinking about how this new normal is operating and how you can optimize your customer support in this new world as we move forward. So just to give you some examples, contactless payments is a great way to make sure we're not exchanging credit cards, exchanging dollars, for example, in order to minimize any sort of exposure there. We're starting to see things like augmented reality and curbside pickup as ways that we can reduce the exposure, again, from a person-to-person basis. So these are all things that people are starting to engage and we're recommending for our customers. Okay, this brings us, I think we're a little early, but would like to open it up for any questions at this time.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, first of all, Collin, for such a great presentation. And we do have a few questions, so I'll go ahead and get started with those. The first one is, which industry do you think will have the hardest time rebuilding their reputation?
So I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing is certainly the restaurant space. So obviously, I'm sure many have heard the challenges of social distancing, as well as in many states, they're limiting the capacity. That means it's just really challenging from a revenue basis. Restaurants already are very low margin businesses. So that has become really challenging And it's challenging just to give the same customer experience when, things are just weird, right? It's people wearing masks, and you're having to build that comfort level in what's normally a very pleasant experience and very different. I remember actually, as things are starting to reopen, a story on a restaurant in Manhattan in New York, and because of social distancing, they were trying to come up with ways to make it still feel like a full restaurant. And so they were actually putting mannequins in the empty tables, which I thought it was crazy, and it was a little bit creepy. It actually felt like something out of Westworld, if you've ever seen that show. So people are trying new ideas and trying to understand how they can kind of re-engage and return to normal. But that certainly is going to be one of the most challenging industries going forward. And unfortunately, probably one of the most significant, where we will see a lot of businesses that just don't return and go out of business, which is really sad and unfortunate about this whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question we have is, it seems like people are still scared to visit the doctor, ER, et cetera. What can healthcare organizations do to combat this?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, that's another area of opportunity for digital marketers to really drive the message home of what they're doing to drive safety and protection. Actually, funny you mentioned that, because I was just watching the news this morning. The CBS Morning News did a whole story on this and some of the challenges from, again, doctors and dentists, and really being able to provide that level of comfort as people are returning to these types of services. So giving examples, they're either spacing seats in the waiting room, or more often than not, asking you to wait in your car, and they'll just send you a text message, maybe come out and actually check your temperature, in your car prior to going in. But the important thing is, one, planning, and then communicating. So making sure you're planning for how you're going to manage and protect consumers and your customers, and then two, communicating it to them. So making sure you're doing consistent email campaigns, you're reaching out to some of your regular clients. If it's a regular client, having in many cases you may have to just call and re-engage if you're trying to get them back in again for an elective surgery or other items, which these are the most profitable services for healthcare facilities. So it's going to be vital for them to be able to bring a comfort level to consumers, and make sure obviously they've put all the safety measures in place so that they're not spreading the virus either. So we're starting to see that today. I think from a healthcare perspective, they're always very conscious about the patient experience, and would never want to put their patients at jeopardy. And I feel like we are seeing them at least put the right procedures in place from our customers.
Okay, perfect. And then we'll do one more. How should brands go about updating their business listing if GMB is still facing delays for non-critical businesses?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer there. Unfortunately, we're seeing the same challenge. This is a situation that Google has elected to decide. I don't know if there's any sort of limitation from a resource perspective, if that's part of what the reasoning behind it. I don't work in Google, so it's hard for me to answer that question. But the only thing I can do as an industry is just, if you have contacts at Google, encouraging them to return to normal, because we need to get this information out to consumers. You saw it in the data that they're having to call locations. They don't trust the data that they're seeing on Google Maps. I gave a perfect example earlier about my hair salon, and the data is just not accurate. We're seeing massive delays outside of, even in the healthcare space, we see some delays, but it's just continuing to be a challenge in this area. If you are having trouble, using a provider does allow you to, we are having some success at reaching out and getting through compared to someone that, is just managing an individual location or a few locations. But it just continues to be kind of an ongoing industry challenge. I would anticipate through the month of June, this will open back up as the country is reopening as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Collin. These were great questions and discussion. And I also just want to thank Chatmeter again for putting together the webinar for us. Just a few more items from Locology before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, locology.com. You just navigate to Research and Resources and drop down to Webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to visit locology.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.